Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. We are watching closely our main trial, the Anthony Kirkland resentencing hearing. This is a death penalty resentencing hearing from a 2010 case where the defendant was sentenced to death for 5 murders. That's right. He was already serving life in prison for 2 other murders. And the prosecution said that in closing arguments that if he didn't get the death penalty as a sentence, that the other final 2 murders were therefore freebies. The state just rested its case, and now we are listening to the first defense witness. Before we go back to trial, I want to bring on our guest, Joseph Scott Morgan. He's a forensic death examiner. Joseph, before the break, we were listening together in our ear and chatting. What do you think that the defense is getting at with this witness? We've seen this witness take the stand before at Law and Crime, quite unsuccessfully, might we add, but what are they getting at, and do you think that this is a successful witness, or are they just going through the motions?
Well, I don't know. I think that they're trying to, to give some basis for this horrible behavior the defendant has been engaged in, these lives that he's absolutely destroyed. We look at this and we think about, well, what could possibly drive an individual to commit such crimes? And so they're looking at this, and the physician who was giving the testimony was talking about the various modalities that they used to examine the brain, and he was going into that in some detail. We think about things like CTs and MRIs and, of course, X-rays, and he was alluding to the fact that he did, in fact, see some abnormalities in the brains. Now, is there actually connectivity between this and violent behavior? And some people agree that there is, but is this going to be substantive enough to give the court a pause and thinking about how they're going to be moving forward and how they're going to view this individual? So
basically, are you saying that if they find a mental defect in these CAT scans or MRIs, that therefore that's a pass to get away from the death penalty?
I think so. I think that that's probably what they're attempting to do here, because they want some kind of anatomical, physiological explanation as to why this fellow acted the way that he did over such a long period of time. What's creating this kind of behavior? And there have been people for years and years that have studied the behavior of serial killers. They do everything from interview to these neurological studies. And, of course, there are post-mortem neurological studies that are conducted on these individuals once they die or have been executed. They'll take the brains and kind of study them and ponder, what is it that sets them apart from the rest of the group that would drive them to do this sort of thing. And it kind of gives us pause in society, because we want to be able to hang our hat on something, to be able to explain this shadowy figure that comes out of the night and does these horrible things. Okay, so let's go back into court and see what this witness has to say, and then we'll have some more fun in studio analysis. We also have another guest with us today, Kenney Baden. She's one of our regulars here, and she's married to a great husband. So if you're watching Law and Crime, you see our commercials and our breaks. So I think the 3 of us can have some real fun in studio analysis. But let's go back to court. Okay, that's video deposition of Dr. Joseph Wu, and we were looking at the PET scan being evaluated there in the picture. Linda, this is our new Law and Crime host at times, and one of our regular guests, Kenney Baden, one of our smartest attorneys in town.
Shucks.
No, you're married to a forensic pathologist.
Right, who's a doctor.
And with us we have a forensic death examiner, Joseph Scott Morgan. So I wanted both of you to have the opportunity to comment on those PET scans that we were seeing. Is that a legitimate argument that there's something, that there's darkness in the brain that could cause or inhibit decisions that would actually cause someone to commit or become a serial killer?
It's a legitimate argument that's not going to fly. Because yes, does it show abnormalities? Absolutely. Does it probably prevent him from processing good from bad, right from wrong, to have his behavior conform? But it's not going to matter.
Because of the 5 murders, that's your opinion. But,
yes.
I mean, look at those pictures. What causes the brain to do that?
It could have been trauma. He could have been hit when he was a youngster. It could have been birth trauma coming through the canal. The early attorney who started this whole neuroscience issue in the courtroom was Jerry Spence, who actually had somebody who was charged with a murder get convicted of a lesser crime, which is when it's usually done to get convicted of a lesser crime, although the death penalty lawyers are now using it to try to avoid the death penalty.
Well, we'll see how successful that is. Is Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death examiner, also with us, or are we by ourselves examining this? Okay, Joseph, great. Okay, I wanted to ask you to also comment on those PET scans real fast. You think that those are legitimate arguments, or?
I can't hear for the court now. Sorry.
Oh, it sounds like, okay, we're going to bring you back after the break. We're having a little bit of a sound issue. So stay with us, and we'll be right back in a few minutes. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. Right now, we are following the Anthony Kirkland resentencing hearing. This is a 2010 case where Anthony Kirkland, the defendant, was sentenced to death, and then it is now being reheard because of prosecutorial misconduct and closing argument, where the prosecution said you must sentence him to death or his last two murders are basically freebies because he was serving time in prison for life in prison for previous murders. He killed 5 people total. Before we go back to court, I want to bring right now on the stand is Dr. Joseph Wu, but I want to bring Joseph Scott Morgan, our forensic death examiner, on, because before the break, I asked you a question and then we had a little bit of a sound issue. And I wanted you to have the opportunity to comment on those PET scans that we were looking at and the darkness, and explain to the viewers what we're seeing and why that matters.
What the neurologist is attempting to paint here is a picture relative to the heat. Remember, he was talking about the heated activity and this sort of thing, how this area is green, should be red, and so forth. And so conversely, he's talking about kind of a deficiency in electrical activity or some kind of blip in this that's creating this abnormal behavior. What he is putting forward here is that he's trying to give them grounds, to give them an idea that, hey, he's implanting this idea that maybe, just maybe, as a result of these odd variances in temperature and this sort of thing, this is affecting this individual's ability to make decisions and to conduct himself as, you would expect anybody to. There's been a lot of studies over the years to talk about, what causes people to do these things. We think about things like head injuries. Maybe
so
there's
let me ask you though, do you really think that these lesions on the PET scan that we're seeing caused him to kill 5 people?
I don't know. You would have to. I don't see any substantive proof here.
I mean, but isn't that what the defense is getting at? They're trying to say.
Well, yeah, that's what they're going to try to hang their hat on, and they're going to try to get the court to buy this.
Okay, but you're an expert at this. Do you think that that's a fair argument, or do you think that you're just more in the lofty analysis of where they're going?
Well, I think that they're going to have an uphill battle, because I think that when the prosecution gets a hold of this, I think that they're going to try to rip the data to shreds. They're going to try to put forth this idea that there's no substantive proof behind this. Maybe they can get some traction with it. I'm not going to buy it, though.
Okay, that makes 3 of us.
But you know what? It is true that certain brain, when the brain is hurt, when you have a broken brain, I'm going to use it. You do things that you shouldn't do. I mean, that's true. Right. The problem is that I think that you're going to find that a lot of people may have some electrical activity, non-conductivity, without the actual lesions that don't go around killing people. So while it can be advanced as a mitigating factor, and I think it is a mitigating factor, the question is it a mitigating factor that overrides the aggravating factors? And that's going to be the issue for the defense. In my opinion, it doesn't, but we'll wait and see. I have an open mind.
All right, let's go back to court. Dr. Joseph Wu, a defense witness, is on the stand. Remember, the state just rested, so the defense is now making its case for all the mitigating factors to overcome the aggravating factors that Kenney Baden just spoke about. So let's go back to court. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. We are following the Anthony Kirkland death penalty resentencing hearing out of Ohio. And before the break, we were listening to defense testimony on mitigating factors on why they think he should not get the death penalty this time around. He did kill 5 people, and the prosecution said in closing arguments the first time in 2010 that if he didn't get sentenced to death, that the last 2 murders out of the 5, that the last 2 would basically be a freebie because he was already serving life in prison for the other murders. The appellate court thought that that was improper and marred the jury's decision. So now we have another jury, same prosecutor, but same case, same facts, different jury. Let's see what they do. But before we go back to court, I have with me Linda Kenney Baden and Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death examiner. We're listening to the defense witness go through the PET scan and the brain and talk about pretty draconian, boring stuff, but interesting to an expert. But how do you think the jury is taking this? I mean, it's pretty common knowledge that the jurors' overall education level, on average, we don't know this jury, is not really on the level of an expert, and this really needs to be broken down to make sense.
Yeah, in my opinion, it does. I don't know how Linda feels about this, but from my perspective, yeah, it really does. That's the key. That's one of the things that Linda's husband, Dr. Michael Baden, has always been able to do. He can relate real well to juries. That's why he's always been so successful. That is to be able to break these complex constructs down so that the everyday person can understand them. And there's nothing wrong with not having expert level education. And you have to be very careful. If you notice, someone in the court told the physician to back off. You need to slow down a little bit. And, of course, he says, well, I get very excited and I talk very quickly. Well, that doesn't play real well with a jury. Let's also think about this. This jury's already been subjected to this horrible, graphic testimony relative to what these victims went through. And then to circle back around now, and you've got the defense putting this forward to kind of excuse those behaviors that this individual had allegedly been engaged in. So it's powerful stuff. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays with the jury.
Well, it'll be really interesting because I remember learning when I was in law school that the average education level of a jury panel is about 7th or 8th grade. And we're listening to stuff that requires advanced degrees, and not only advanced degrees, but those with advanced degrees in a whole other profession still have a hard time processing what's being said. So it could be a good defense tactic, though, to mitigate the aggravating factors by just confusing the jury as well. We need to go back to court because we are live, and they have a live feed in there right now, but let's stay tuned for more in-studio analysis when we return. Welcome back. We're watching the defense put on its case in the Anthony Kirkland death penalty resentencing hearing. With me is Linda Kenney Baden, and we also have with us Joseph Morgan, forensic death examiner. We are discussing, and before we went back into court, I wanted to give Linda an opportunity to discuss the importance of jury selection in helping to parse out the important information that these heavy, intense knowledge experts bring to the table.
Yeah, keying off on what Joseph said before, obviously you want an expert, if you can have one, that will relate to the jury and what we call keep it simple, stupid, the KISS concept. Yes. Right, and every lawyer is taught that from day one, and I also teach young lawyers that the expert has to speak plain English because we're in the courtroom where English is spoken. They have to be able to not put big words, use words that relate to the jury, but it shows how jury selection is also important. If you have a highly technical expert, you may want somebody on your jury that also has a highly technical education in scientific issues, in any scientific issues, whether it's medical, whether it's engineering and all, because they'll be more likely to listen to the concepts and parse them out and evaluate them, as opposed to someone who may say, okay, so what? He's got some kind of thing going on, and I don't really care. So I think jury selection becomes very important in this type of
What I think is interesting, though, is jury selection is important, but But some attorneys would say, you know what, that person has too much knowledge. I'm going to strike them. I'm going to voir dire them and strike them for cause. And think that maybe a juror that doesn't understand might deliver the result they want because they can explain it the way they want the jury to process it, rather than someone that might be smarter than the expert.
And that's why I'll guarantee you that these attorneys had focus groups with jury consultants to see what would be good, who would be the good juror, because you're absolutely right. That's something that's felt by some attorneys, but other attorneys, such as myself, don't believe that that person's going to take over the jury totally. I mean, maybe you want them to take over the jury in this kind of situation, so you want somebody with a little bit more technical knowledge.
Right, but then you have the issue of maybe the battle of the egos and a battle of experts, and who's smarter, the expert on the jury or the expert on the stand?
Well, all you want to do is, for defense, is get a mitigating factor, and then we go to the balancing.
And whether or not those mitigating factors will outweigh the aggravating factors. That is the question. Stay tuned right after this break. Thanks, Anthony. To piggyback on that, who wants to steal a shark? I mean, I can understand saying you want to raise, a baby shark here, not a baby shark for real, but a baby that's going to be a shark in life and have a little teeth to bite. But who steals a shark and puts it in a stroller and leaves it?
I don't know. I watched it this morning. When I said, I have to watch this video. I couldn't believe it. There was something called a horn shark. Maybe the child decided they wanted a shark and they were helping their kid. Who knows? I mean, but it was well planned, wasn't it? Except for the getaway. Well, except for the not getting caught part. Yeah.
Well, and so hopefully that shark is going to be okay.
That's right, yeah.
That's right now the
it's in
shark
a holding tank to see if it gets shocked, because if the shark dies, that would be terribly tragic, obviously. Terrible.
Well, yep, and I'm an animal person,
I know,
and I'm a vegan here, so, if the shark dies, I would want to bring a wrongful death action, and unfortunately, I want the death penalty for the shark, but I don't think that would fly very far, because animals don't have the same rights as humans. So anyway, we're following closely the case out of Ohio, the Anthony Kirkland death penalty resentencing case, and right now we have on the stand Karen Luman. She's the coroner who's giving testimony for the prosecution's case, which is trying to show aggravating factors on why Anthony Kirkland should be sentenced to death again. Because remember, in 2010, the jury sentenced him to death, and this is a rehearing. So let's go back to court and take a look at her testimony. Okay, so that was Karen Luman, the deputy chief coroner for the prosecution's case of why the defendant, Anthony Kirkland, should get the death penalty again, like he did in 2010. With me is Linda Kenney Baden and Joseph Scott Morgan, forensic death examiner. Both of you are very relevant right now since we're hearing from the chief deputy coroner. Before we get into your thoughts, I do want to make note that the jurors, according to our freelance reporter out there, are visibly upset listening to this testimony because it is pretty graphic, right?
Yes, it's very graphic.
Right.
And one of the things, if you just have a death penalty portion sentencing, the jury's not desensitized. They haven't gone through the whole trial where they've heard it over and over again. So this is hitting them hard, especially when you're dealing with Esme, who's a young girl. I mean, that probably just hits them even harder. The jurors are going to have post-traumatic stress disorder after this trial, no doubt.
I wonder, can they bring a lawsuit for that? PTSD?
No, they can't. But something that we don't look into very much.
We don't look into it very much, and I actually think it's a good thing that the jurors are getting upset and inflamed listening to this testimony, because it's very different to listen to transcripts and listen to experts give testimony versus watching it live and seeing how horrific and gory it is. But instead, we're listening to them break it down in a very technical term of the different pieces of the body parts that were either penetrated or mutilated. Right, Joseph?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Carissa. And this is in stark contrast to what we saw just a little while ago with the neurologist. Did you see how on point she was and how relatable she was up on the stand? This is a very bright woman who sees a lot of horrible things, but she was able to kind of break this down. And I think that that's one of the reasons that this is so impactful for the jury. She's talking about the injuries that this last young woman sustained relative to the strap muscles and to the fractured cartilage in her neck. And it really paints a gruesome picture as to what the last moments of this young girl's life were like, because not only do we have homicidal violence here, we've got sexual violence on top of this. where she goes into some detail talking about the trauma that this poor girl sustained both vaginally and rectally. So this is a horrible set of circumstances that this forensic pathologist is actually doing a fine job with.
Right, she's really breaking it down for the jury to see, which is what the prosecution needs to do to prove aggravating factors. And I think one thing we need to remind the viewers is that Esme Kenney was 13 years old. She was a baby. I mean, 13 years old in the state of Ohio is an aggravating factor.
That's right.
In addition to the sexual assault, in addition to the arson and the burning. But we're going to continue to dissect this and follow this in the courtroom live. But before we do, we must take a quick break, so stick with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. Before the break, we were discussing the defense witness and analyzing his testimony on the stand. This is Dr. Joseph Wu, and he has a video deposition in court. And what we were all discussing during break, Linda and Joseph and I, is the timeline of these lesions to the brain and his injuries and his 5 different murders, and does it make sense? And how do you look at the actual images and know if it's a new injury or an old injury, and how does that relate to the current murders, and is it really a mitigating factor? So with all of that kind of processing and percolating in our brains, let's have a discussion on that. Joseph, what are your thoughts about the timeline of this, and can you tell, looking at those PET scans, what injury really caused those lesions, which would have caused him to flip?
Yeah, I can speak to the idea in forensic pathology, having worked in the morgue for years and years, about how forensic pathologists will age injuries in the brain. You know, fresh injuries in the brain will have little focal areas of hemorrhage and that sort of thing. But if you've got prior events that have happened, sometimes you'll have scar tissue that will build up in particular specific areas or focal areas where trauma has occurred. Now, what's curious about this is that you know, if we reflect back, this first homicide that this individual was involved in was way back in the mid 80s. All right, and so you know, the Dr. Wu was referring to the bicycle injury. He was referring to the motor vehicle injury and this sort of thing, and he talked about how personalities change and all this sort of thing. Well, how do you explain the stuff that happened back in the mid 1980s with the first victim? You know, we were kind of kicking this idea around, and you're thinking, well, did he become suddenly a more violent perpetrator? You know, after the fact, was this an escalating event along the way, or had these events been precipitated by the trauma that he alludes to that this individual sustained as a child? So this has got to be explained in court, because I got to tell you, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. You don't have to have upper level degrees. There's people on the jury that are going to be looking at this and saying, I don't understand. This first case took place all these years ago. How does this play in? And I know those 2 trials are not in question, but those cases are not in question. But just in a timeline here, it's hard to understand this.
Right. Okay. And Linda, what do you think? I mean, we're listening to this. It's clearly escalating. Is the defense just grabbing at everything they can to try to say this is mitigating factors? Look, he was in car accidents and bike accidents. And by the way, I'm a plaintiff's attorney. A lot of people are in multiple accidents. I mean, is this really believable?
Yeah, no, I think it is believable. I think the science behind it is absolutely believable, and I think the fact that he may have some brain injuries and had brain injuries is believable. But you know, but listening to it, going off of what Joe said, you're directing our conversations here so that all the viewers can follow, right? The lawyers have to direct the conversations of this doctor. And I would want to know, I'd like a chart. He had injury 1 and then 2, injury 3, injury 4, injury 5, injury 6. So they could see and then say, oh my God. And he's like, injury, 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 injury. And he keeps talking injury. And right now it's just going, whoo, right over the head.
Yeah, because it's not really clear when we hear this what caused what injury caused what murder, and did it really cause the murder?
Yeah.
And is it reasonable to link the injuries to the murders?
And how damages the brain in that area? Yes, the PET scan can detect cellular damage at the cellular level, but how much? You know, have you seen other people with this type of injury that have become violent? That's the questions I want to know from the doctor.
And I want to know from the doctor, can you tell, looking at these images, which injuries were related to which accident? Can you tell, looking at these lesions, the date of those injuries that caused those lesions? Is that something you can tell, Joseph?
Yeah, that would be my question as well, and I can only imagine that the prosecution is going to be rather probative in this area, you know, when we get to hear the rest of this video depo here. But yeah, I don't know that the defense has done a good job. This idea that Linda put forth of timelining this thing, and again, that gives it more of this very complex construct. It simplifies it all the more so that we, you know, just the everyday Joe can kind of understand this thing and understand the progression of this. Yeah, they can age these things. I don't think that they can be aged quite as well through imaging as, say, for instance, a pathologist can at autopsy after death, but we don't have that advantage here.
Right, and just for those of you watching, we're looking at a live feed right now, and as you can see there, the defense witness is on a video depo. So that's already another disadvantage we have with this timeline, because this deposition was taken out of context of the trial and rehearing. So while we're sitting here saying, hey, we want a timeline, and the jurors are sitting there probably thinking the same thing, because, you know, we're having issues. We're highly educated people.
We're jurors,
and,
you know, 13, 14, and 15, right?
Yep, exactly, and we are having a hard time parsing out whether or not this is a real mitigating factor. Nonetheless, we're going to continue with that live feed in court, but we're going to, before we go back, go to our other trending top crime stories around the country.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Investigators released surveillance video of the man they think is responsible for the fatal shooting of a former doctor for former President George H.W. Bush. 65-year-old Dr. Mark Houseknecht was shot dead while riding his bike to work at the Texas Medical Center in Houston by another biker. Authorities released a video of the suspect riding a bike in the moments after Houseknecht was fatally shot. The suspect remains at large. The former prosecutor featured in the Netflix docuseries The Staircase was found dead in her home in North Carolina. Authorities are waiting the outcome of an autopsy, but say the death of 57-year-old Frida Black does not appear suspicious. Black helped to convict Michael Peterson in 2003 for the murder of his wife Kathleen. The murder conviction was later overturned in 2011 after it was revealed an analyst misled the jury about blood found at the scene of the crime. 2 men and a woman caught on camera stealing a shark at a Texas aquarium have reportedly confessed to the crime. The unidentified thieves can be seen on surveillance video snatching the horned shark from the San Antonio aquarium and using a baby stroller to pull off the caper. The suspects were apprehended a short time after leaving the aquarium. They now face theft and other charges. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. Wow, Linda,
Yes.
well, you know, we see some bizarre stories here on Law and Crime, and that one, stealing a baby shark, is one of the weirdest ones I've seen.
A horn shark. I never heard of a shark, but first of all, dun, 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 you know, like Jaws.
Jaws.
But maybe they wanted to sell it. I don't know.
You think they wanted to sell it?
Who knows? They wanted to keep it. They wanted to sell it. Maybe it was in the black market. Who knows? I mean, but it was well planned. Look at this. They had obviously cased this before. They'd been there. They knew what they could do.
Well planned. Can premeditation be part of stealing a shark? Can that kind of intent go into shark stealing?
And I hope the shark has other family members that go after them, even though they've been arrested.
I wonder who the real sharks are. The little shark or the sharks that are the big guys that are stealing the sharks?
But it's terrible, right? That animal could die. I mean, that animal's being watched right now for shock. It could die because these stupid people. I mean, this really pisses me off. Excuse my language. Me too.
But
it really gets
as
me.
you know,
I mean, I'm very upset with the murder, obviously, but animals don't have anyone to protect them.
Nope. And you're speaking to the choir here as a lifelong vegan. So, no way.
Joseph was laughing back there. Did you hear that?
Yeah, okay, Joseph, what do you want to say?
I'm not laughing at you. I'm just thinking I've actually caught shark, and the last thing that I want is to be near a shark. I wanted to get them off my line as quickly as I possibly could when I was fishing. So I can't imagine wrapping a shark up and walking physically out of a structure with it and getting to my vehicle. It's beyond the pale.
I mean, so you've caught shark. Why do you think that these guys want to catch shark?
I have no idea, and it's not necessarily catching shark. It's, you know,
stealing shark,
stealing shark. Yeah, exactly.
Premeditation, well planned, kidnapping. Gosh, we have a whole bunch of crimes here, and if it dies, it's wrongful death. All right,
look for somebody that's got a large saltwater tank at home. I think that's the first clue that you've got to look for here.
Well, what was the first clue? I missed that.
Yeah, you've got to find someone that has a large saltwater aquarium
tank
at home in order to facilitate
Okay,
the
we got to go
safety.
to a quick break. Hopefully they get that tank.
Yeah.
That's Keith Witherell, the Cincinnati Police Department. He is discussing his interview with Anthony Kirkland, the defendant, who is now standing trial for his resentencing hearing. Will he get the death penalty or not? With me, Kenney Baden. I want to just dissect this as a lawyer here. You mentioned something interesting. Wondering what's his behavior been like in jail since he's been incarcerated over these murders. Is it something that would be a mitigating factor, or does it matter?
Well, also I'd like to see what his behavior was like. Was he angry in jail when he first got out in 2003, and then he went back for 6 months in 2008, and then now he's been in jail obviously since the first. He's been in prison since the last conviction that's not sentenced. Does he have angry outbursts in jail? Has he had incidents in jail? If he's pretty clean and it's just the normal jail stuff that convicts get into, then that kind of mitigates against his brain lesions, brain activity causing him to be angry.
Do you anticipate that we're going to hear testimony from the prosecution or the defense that would address that?
We may. It depends on what the records show. I mean, if they're kind of mixed, no one may go there. But if the shows that he's pretty clean, because remember, this detective said he's very nice. He says, thank you, hello. He can conform his behavior, and he just looks like, when he's sitting there, like an angel. So there are times that he can conform his behavior. Apparently not with women. Apparently he's very violent.
Right, and we just heard the detective say in the interview that he was very controlling, and he also was sort of inconsistent. So he can't control his behavior, but he is controlling.
Right. But he can control his behavior in an interview room, right? So there's times he can and times he can't. So how do these pets can't affect this?
When he couldn't is when they appealed to the emotion of his son. That's how they got him to break.
That's right. So he did have some love for the son, obviously. So there is a conflict there. But still, I think I'd like to see the records.
I have another question. Do you think there are other victims besides these five?
Yes, I do. I think that there are other victims.
Okay, I think there are other victims too. Could the prosecution and the defense come to an agreement saying, look, he'll solve some other cold cases, but take the death penalty off the table?
Sure, and I wonder whether that's been done already or whether that's been rejected, or the prosecution just says we don't care anymore because we don't know, because he's done so many victims, we don't know.
Do they think that if they get the death penalty, then he has nothing to lose and he'll talk anyway because serial killers generally want to brag?
Yeah, they generally do, and if he gets the death penalty, there's going to be, as we know, years of litigation, so maybe that's something that you can play with him if you're the prosecution.
Right, but he's already had years of litigation. Would it be years more?
Would be absolutely years more. He may die of old age even if he gets the death penalty.
Isn't that a shame? That's how this system works. It's so costly. This case has cost us more money in appeals.
Yeah, but this case, this guy is clearly guilty. There are other cases that we know people are not guilty.
Oh, he's guilty. The question is whether or not death is the appropriate sentence. We're going to take a quick break, but stay tuned with us, and we're going to continue to dissect this trial and keep a close eye on the courtroom when we return. Welcome back. I'm Carissa Kranz. Before the break, we were having a discussion about Anthony Kirkland's death penalty resentencing hearing. And with me on set is Kenney Baden, and with us, joining us on Skype, is forensic death examiner Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, I wanted to give you the opportunity to comment on what we were discussing before the break, on whether or not you think that there are more victims. Already we know that there are 5 victims, and I was wondering if there are more victims, why not solve some closed cases and take the death penalty off the table? In your professional experience, do you think there are more victims?
Yeah. You don't normally see a pause like this. If you look at BTK, he had some pauses, but he would still pick up periodically and go back. There have been others that paused, but we're talking about from the mid 80s, and then we jump forward many years afterwards when this guy came to light again. So I have to think that there probably are more victims, and certainly on the behalf of the families out there in the greater area surrounding where these cases were found, I think that it's owed to the families that are missing people to be rather probative on the parts of the police to go and seek this information out, because he would be someone you would want to talk to. It's interesting what the detective had said, wasn't it? That they were not going to allow the female detectives into the room to speak to him that had been at the scene. I think that this guy, more than likely, bears a lot of anger toward females. The series, I've worked 3 separate series of serial homicides in my career, and each one of them involved male serial killers that were attacking females, and they all had they were just rageful people that hated women. And so I wonder if that's what he was thinking. He's kind of holding them back, keeping them away from him, because he doesn't know how they're going to be manipulated. He also doesn't know if this guy's going to strike out at them. Right. So yeah, long story short, I believe that there probably are more victims, and this guy's definitely developed some patterns along the way. He's got a specific dumping area, and probably if we look beyond this, I think that the methodologies that he employed are kind of going to be very, very similar. These people rarely deviate.
And so you're saying that all the interviewers were all male and they kept the females away from him? Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, that's what the detective implied, at least at that moment in time.
So just a question on strategy to get him to talk. If he loses control around women, wouldn't it be a good thing to have women interview him? Maybe they would get a rise out of him and get the answers that they wanted faster, rather than.
Yeah, that's what I was alluding to. I think it's an excellent strategy, because you know what buttons to press with him. The detective had already picked up on this. He had talked about his level of intelligence. He stated that this guy had average to above intelligence. He was highly engaging. He had he had a quick sense about him, and so he's able to control himself in these environments. But he might have an impulse control issue if you get him around women, and wouldn't that be rather glaring?
I think that would have been a smart move, to get him around women to crack, rather than pulling on the strings of, oh, you're a father, and getting him to crack to solve it based on the family card. Who knows? It went the way it went. Right now, we're going to go back into court. There's a deposition of Lisa Kenney. This is the mother of Esme Kenney, the final victim, the 13-year-old that was going for a jog, that just bumped into the defendant, and that triggered his anger, where he lost control, and unfortunately, this little girl lost her life at the hands of Anthony Kirkland. Let's take a look. That is the mother of Esme Kenney, and you heard her say it herself. I just had that feeling.
And this last homicide murder is so horrible. Maybe I'm taking it personally because the name is Kenney and it's spelled the same
Linda
way.
Kenney Baden for everybody.
And 13-year-old, but it's just so horrible.
I
can't even imagine what this mother was going through.
It is. All right. Well, I know that Linda has to go. It's thank you for our time today. You know, we appreciate your insight. And Joseph, before we let you go, I want to give you an opportunity to give some final thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's absolutely striking. The testimony all the way around. I think this morning in particular with the coroners was.
All right. I've got to let you go, but thank you so much for your time, and hope to see you both back here soon on set with me. It's been fun having you.